My son dragged me to court to prove that I was no longer mentally competent. He wanted to strip his father of rights, seize the assets, and turn me into a legal burden. But only 45 minutes later, the judge looked him square in the eye and said, "It isn't your father who's lost capacity. It's you who's lost his moral compass. If one day the person you trusted most turns their back, if your kindness is read as weakness, and your silence is mistaken for submission, then listen to this whole story. Because sometimes justice doesn't knock with a gavel, but shows up in the way you remain calm when everything collapses. Don't share this story out of curiosity. Share it if you've ever stood alone and refused to bow. And if you believe dignity never goes out of style, hit subscribe and turn on notifications so that each week, when stories about quiet justice and gratitude are told, you'll be the first to hear them. I arrived at Mason's house just as the sun set over West Des Moines. I was 68, retired after more than 40 years as a construction engineer, now taking only a few small consulting projects a month. My life had been steady and quiet until that evening. My son Mason, 39, and his wife, Claire, 36, had invited me to dinner to make peace. 2 weeks earlier, Mason had come by with a business plan. He said he was launching a modular home construction company and needed $180,000 in startup capital. I asked why he hadn't gone to the bank. He said interest rates were high and the paperwork slow. When I refused, Mason called me selfish and walked out. Then we had no contact for 2 weeks. So when he called back asking to make peace, I agreed, just to find out what was really going on. The door opened before I could ring. Claire smiled and spoke softly, telling me I was right on time. The kitchen smelled of braised beef and roasted garlic. Mason came out, put his arm around me, and said, "Old things should be left behind." The meal was carefully prepared. A cloth on the table, wine poured, candles lit at each end. It all felt too perfect for a simple family dinner. I sat down and tried to stay calm. "Have a little wine, Dad?" Claire asked. I nodded. Mason sat opposite and raised his glass. "To family." I raised mine without speaking. We made small talk, weather, work, our grandchild in 3rd grade. Everything seemed to go smoothly, but I sensed something was off. Mason checked his watch more than once, and Claire kept topping off my glass before I'd finished the first. Midway through the meal, Mason asked, "Do you still own that lot in Polk County?" I answered, "Still holding it." He nodded. "Land prices must be up." Claire added, "Don't let money drive a wedge in the family." I simply said, "Sometimes principle is worth more than money." My phone buzzed. Mason's gaze flicked to my hand. His reaction was a touch too quick. The screen showed 2 messages from my gardener, Neil Peterson. First, "Are you home?" Second, "I hear noises in your house. The study light is on. The back door's open. Should I call the police?" I read them twice. A cold feeling ran down my spine. I stood up. The chair scraped loudly. "Dad, you need to go now," I said. Mason sprang up, walked around the table, and grabbed my wrist. "Dad, wait 5 minutes. Listen to me." His grip was strong. I looked him in the eye. "Explain. Why did you need me here at this exact time? Why bring up the Polk County lot tonight?" He avoided my gaze. "You don't understand the pressure we're under. We just need—" I cut him off. "I don't ask what you need." I pulled my wrist free and texted Neil, "Call 911. I'm on my way home." Claire stepped toward the doorway to block me. "Dad, don't make a scene. We're family." I replied, "Family doesn't schedule its care like a contract." She stepped back. I walked straight out the door. Mason said nothing. On the porch, I called Neil. He said he was outside the gate but hadn't gone in. I told him, "Stay put. Wait for the police." I started the car. The clock read 7:12. It would take about 15 minutes to get to my house if I didn't hit a red light. I dialed 911 and reported, "This is Harvey Quinn. Someone has broken into my home at 2147 Birchwood Drive, West Des Moines, Iowa, 50265. I'm on my way. My gardener called the police." The dispatcher told me to wait outside when I arrived and not to enter alone. I said, "Understood." I hung up and gripped the wheel. I replayed every detail from the dinner. The set table, the question about the lot, Mason checking his watch, his hand on my wrist. It all formed a clear picture. That meal was a pretext to keep me away from my own house. I turned right at the intersection by the shopping center and saw police lights flickering in the distance. I sped up. My feeling wasn't fury so much as a cold clarity. There are limits that, once crossed, can never be mended. I didn't know exactly what awaited me at home, but I knew one thing with certainty. Someone had planned this, and if Mason was involved, tonight would break more than a lock. It would shatter a father's trust. When I arrived at 2147 Birchwood Drive, 2 police cruisers were already parked outside. Red and blue lights flashed against the windows, flooding the quiet neighborhood in uneasy color. Neil Peterson stood by the fence, phone in hand, and hurried toward me as soon as he saw my car. "Mr. Quinn, I'm sorry. I didn't know whether to go in. The back door was ajar, the study lights on, but I didn't hear anything." "You did the right thing, Neil," I said, patting his shoulder. "Thank you for waiting." A young officer approached. "Are you the homeowner?" "Yes, Harvey Quinn." "Officer Rodriguez," she said, showing her badge. "We've done a preliminary sweep. No signs of forced entry, only the rear door open. Please wait here a moment. We'll go in together." I nodded and looked toward the backyard. The glass door hung slightly open, the curtain breathing faintly in the wind, too normal to be safe. When they signaled clear, I followed inside. The living room was tidy, the kitchen untouched, but upstairs my heart sank. The wooden jewelry chest where my late wife Ellen kept her pieces stood wide open, the velvet box empty. Besides, the drawer where I kept repair cash was bare. "Can you list what's missing?" Rodriguez asked. "My wife's jewelry, about $20,000 in cash, and a wooden case with 3 watches, an Omega Seamaster, a Hamilton 1968, and an old Rolex I wore in the service." "Anything else?" "Yes, the deed to 40 acres in Polk County. It was in the office safe." We went downstairs. The office looked orderly, but something felt wrong. The wall safe was intact, the keypad unmarked. I entered the code. The door swung open smoothly, as if no one had forced it. Yet the land file and several thick envelopes were gone. "Someone opened it with the code," I said quietly. "No one knows it but me and my son." She wrote it down. "Do you have an electronic security system?" "Safe Home Security. It keeps an access log." "Good. Can you pull it up now?" I turned on the computer. The screen showed the arm-disarm record. Under February 20th, 2:47 p.m., one entry froze my breath. "User, Mason guest. System disabled." I stood silent. The officer read it too. "Mason is my son." She nodded slowly. "We'll need a printed log and timestamps." I printed 3 copies and signed them. Just then, a familiar voice called from the doorway. "Harvey?" I turned. Laura Nash, my next-door neighbor, a retired Des Moines detective, stood there. I saw the patrol cars and came over. "What's happened?" Rodriguez motioned her to stay back, but I said, "It's fine. Laura's a friend. She can witness something." Laura stepped in, scanning the room. "Last week I saw Mason here. Around 3 p.m., I was mowing the lawn. He parked in front, stayed about 45 minutes. When he left, he carried a small black bag. Before driving off, he stared at your garage camera for a few seconds, like he was checking it." I looked to Rodriguez. She nodded. "That detail matters. Thank you, Ms. Nash." Laura nodded and left. The officer dusted for prints on the back door and around the safe. After an hour, they wrapped up, advising me to lock up and touch nothing. Neil said he'd return in the morning to tend the yard as usual. When I finally shut the door, the house was so still I could hear the wall clock tick. I sat at the desk, reopened the log, and watched the blinking cursor beside "System Disabled." Mason guessed. No mistake, no glitch, no coincidence. My own son had disarmed the security system 5 days before everything vanished. I saved the log to a USB drive, sealed it in an envelope, and leaned back in the chair. What I felt wasn't rage. It was perfect clarity. I had lost my trust in my son, and now I knew exactly what I had to do to protect the rest of my life. The next morning, I drove to downtown Des Moines, as the sun rose and the streets were still quiet. The coffee in my hand grew cold while I sat in front of the 12-story glass building of Ellis and Brenner Law. I had worked with Margaret Ellis nearly 10 years earlier on a concrete bridge project over the Raccoon River. Back then, she was the city's legal counsel, and I was the chief engineer. I still remember her precision. She was someone who never said an unnecessary word. I had called ahead, and she agreed to meet that same day. When I entered the office, Margaret was waiting at the door, hair neatly tied, gray blazer, voice clear and steady. "Harvey, it's been a long time. The moment I heard your voice, I knew something was wrong. I never thought I'd come back to a law office for something like this," I said, taking a seat. She nodded and motioned for her assistant to bring water. "I read the summary you sent last night. Losing personal items is bad enough, but losing property documents is far worse. Did the police mention the possibility that the thief might use the deed to borrow or mortgage something?" "Not yet. They only lifted fingerprints. But the only person who knows the safe code is Mason." Margaret was silent for a moment. "If that's true, you need to protect your assets immediately. Don't wait for charges. I suggest 3 steps. She pulled out a blank sheet and wrote each line carefully. 1. Create a revocable living trust, so all remaining assets are placed under a new entity, making it harder for anyone to sue or use your name for collateral. 2. Rewrite your will to exclude anyone who poses a threat and appoint a neutral executor. 3. Update your power of attorney so no one can sign documents on your behalf." I looked at the list. "How long will it take?" "At least 2 weeks," she replied. "We'll need 3 signatures, 2 witnesses, and a notary. I'll schedule everything at once. These documents will be recorded at Polk County Court and in Iowa's property registry. Once complete, any forged filing will be automatically blocked." I nodded. "I want to start right away. What do you need from me?" Margaret opened her laptop. "An asset list. Bank accounts, savings, investments, real estate, life insurance, collectible valuables. The more detailed, the better." I placed the folder I'd brought on her desk. "I've listed nearly everything. Only the Polk County land value fluctuates. I'll get a professional appraisal." "Good." She looked at me carefully. "Harvey, I know this isn't easy, but moving fast is the only way to stay in control. Don't wait for the police. They'll take months to reach conclusions." I nodded quietly. "I understand." While she stepped out to get sample forms, I unlocked my phone and turned on voice recording. I didn't hide it. When she returned, I said plainly, "I'll record this meeting. I don't want anything misunderstood later. Since yesterday, I've learned that everything needs evidence." Margaret smiled. "I completely agree. In my field, documents are the only things that don't lie." We reviewed every clause together. She explained each section clearly, the trust naming, how to choose a trustee, and the scope of authority for the agent. I asked questions. She answered precisely. The meeting lasted nearly 2 hours. Before I stood, Margaret leaned forward slightly. "Harvey, one more thing. If Mason really took that land deed, he might try to use it as collateral. Some small banks or private lenders don't verify thoroughly. They might have already accepted the file right after the break-in." I froze. "You mean he could have already taken out a loan?" She nodded. "Or is about to. That's why you must finish the trust immediately. Once it's notarized, ownership transfers to the legal entity, and any fake document filed afterward becomes invalid. But you have to act now." I looked her in the eye. "How soon can I sign?" "Tomorrow I'll have the first draft ready," Margaret said. "We'll start the process immediately. I'll call a notary and arrange 2 witnesses here in the office. Just bring all the remaining originals." I thanked her and stepped into the hallway. The morning air was colder, the wind threading through the buildings, carrying the scent of coffee and exhaust. I stopped by the ground floor railing and looked down at the street. Cars kept moving. Everyone had somewhere to be. So did I. Only my task now was to protect myself from the son I had once trusted most. In my mind, Margaret's final words echoed, crisp and certain. You must start now, Harvey, because right this moment, they might already be using your land as collateral. 2 days after our first meeting, I returned to Ellis and Brenner to sign all the documents. On the table lay 3 thick folders, each with a different colored tab: Revocable Living Trust, Last Will, and Power of Attorney. Margaret Ellis went over every clause before I signed. Harvey, she said, the total assets placed in the trust are valued at $2.3 million, including your Birchwood Drive home, long-term investments, 2 savings accounts, and the Polk County land. Once notarized, ownership transfers to the Quinn Family Trust. You'll retain full control, but legally, no one can touch a thing. I listened carefully and signed each page. 2 in-office witnesses countersigned, and the notary stamped each document. Margaret gathered everything neatly into a leather binder and handed me a copy. From now on, Harvey, your assets are protected. Mason can't use anything in your name for loans or collateral. I'll submit digital copies to the Polk County Recorder today. I thanked her. Some of the weight lifted, though I knew the matter was far from over. Leaving her office, I went straight to First National Bank downtown. I met with the branch manager and requested multi-layered security for all accounts, 2-factor authentication, facial recognition, and in-person verification for any transaction requiring my original signature. After that, I stopped at Safe Home Security, the company that had installed my home system. I ordered a full upgrade, high-resolution cameras, cloud storage, new smart locks, and fresh access codes. The technician asked, "Would you like facial recognition for visitors?" I answered, "Yes, and only I can delete data." That afternoon, I rented an off-site safe deposit box at the bank to store original documents, the trust copies, and the security logs. The clerk asked what size I needed. I said, the largest available. That night, I reorganized my desk. Old files to the left, the new trust binder in the center. I checked every envelope, every copy, every seal, everything precise, orderly, complete, like a finished engineering project. Around 9 p.m., Margaret called. "Harvey, I want to connect you with someone. Her name is Jennifer Hang, a former IRS investigator who now runs FinForensics, LLC. She specializes in financial tracking and asset fraud. I believe she can help you uncover what Mason and Claire are doing with the missing documents." "Do you think they're moving assets?" I asked. "Highly possible," Margaret said. "I've seen this pattern many times. When people get desperate, they don't stop at theft. They turn stolen property into cash. Jennifer will trace bank transfers, emails, and any filings linked to the Polk County land or other missing assets." The next morning, I met Jennifer at her office on the 8th floor of the Commerce Tower. She was around 40, small-built, hair tied neatly, voice sharp and direct. The walls behind her were lined with private investigator licenses and framed commendations from the IRS. "Mr. Quinn, I've reviewed your summary," she said. "I'll need 3 things: an itemized list of what's missing, names of anyone with access, and a copy of the security logs." I handed over the prepared folder. "Everything I have is in here, including the Safe Home printout." Jennifer scanned it. "I'll start with email and financial traces. If your son tried to use the stolen assets, there will be a trail. People in this situation always leave more clues than they realize." "How long until results?" I asked. "With this data, about 72 hours. I'll send the first report to you and Ms. Ellis." We shook hands, and I left. In the elevator, I realized I was changing. 3 days ago, I was a father still trying to believe in his son. Now, I was acting like an engineer, managing a crisis site, calculating, not emotional. 3 days later, Right on schedule, Jennifer called. "I found something you need to see," she said, calm but certain. While combing through correspondence, I located an email from Claire to Alden and Finch Auction House in Chicago, dated February 17th, just 3 days before the break-in. She asked about quick appraisal and liquidation of a 12-piece Georgian silver set, along with some antique jewelry. My grip tightened on the phone. "You're sure that matches my wife's set?" "Exactly," Jennifer said. She described every detail. Engraved E on the handles, velvet-lined wooden box. The auction house refused the transaction because it required proof of legal ownership. I'm securing a copy of the email and metadata to confirm the send time. I paused for a few seconds. "Excellent work, Jennifer. Keep every piece of evidence. I'll forward it to Attorney Ellis first thing tomorrow." After hanging up, I looked around my study. The bridge blueprints, Ellen's photos, my framed engineering license, they were all still there, yet everything felt unfamiliar, detached from memory. What had been stolen wasn't just money or land. It was the last boundary between family and stranger. I turned on the desk lamp, opened my notebook, and wrote one line. "From today, every action requires evidence." The phone screen lit again, a new message from Jennifer. "Harvey, one more thing. Claire's email was sent from a device registered at your son's home address." I stared at the words, knowing the investigation had just entered a new phase, and there was no turning back. On Monday morning, I sat in my study under the dim desk lamp, notebook open beside the folder Jennifer had emailed. On the screen, the subject line stood out. Subject: Anna Coleman. Inquiry to Alden and Finch Auction House. The sender used an email registered with Claire's phone number, describing the silver set as thus a family heirloom from a recently deceased relative, needing quick liquidation. Each word froze me in place. Ellen, the recently deceased relative she mentioned, was my wife, gone 4 years ago. I placed a small recorder next to the landline. In Iowa, the one-party consent law allows a person involved in a call to record legally without informing the other side. I had confirmed that with Margaret before acting. I dialed Alden and Finch Auction House in Chicago. After 3 rings, a calm professional voice answered, "Alden and Finch, this is Mr. Wang from Appraisals. How may I help you?" "This is Harvey Quinn from Des Moines. I'm calling about a silver set engraved with the letter E, submitted for appraisal about 10 days ago under the name Anna Coleman." There was a brief pause before he replied, "Yes, I remember. She said it was a family piece and wanted a fast valuation for auction. We requested proof of ownership, but haven't received any." I kept my tone steady. "I'm the legal owner of that set. It was taken from my home on February 25th. I'm working with law enforcement and my attorney. Could you confirm the date and nature of your exchange?" "Yes. I can send a written summary to you or your attorney, but we can't release photos or client data without legal authorization." "I understand. Just confirm that someone using the name Anna Coleman contacted you and described the engraving, correct?" "Correct. She mentioned that detail exactly." "Thank you, Mr. Wang. My attorney, Margaret Ellis, will reach out." "Of course. We'll cooperate once we receive her request." I ended the call, stopped the recorder, and saved the file. The clip was under 4 minutes, but sufficient as admissible evidence. I renamed it Call Recording Wang Auction. Confirmed.mp3. An hour later, Jennifer Hang called. Her voice was firm. "Harvey, I traced Mason's financial records. What did you find?" "A new loan opened at Midwest Capital Bank on February 21st, 4 days before the theft. Amount, $200,000, interest rate, 18.5% per year. The collateral listed is a rural property in Polk County, 40 acres, certificate number 21845PC. That matches the deed you reported missing." My hand tightened around the phone. "So he used my land deed." "Exactly. I also discovered a commercial lease under the name Quinn Modular Solutions, LLC, signed 10 days before the theft, At the address, IT Building, downtown 6th floor, Suite 611. Monthly rent is $6,200. Deposit and first month paid by check from Mason Quinn's personal account at Midwest Capital. A chill went through me. Can you get copies of the loan and lease? Already did, Jennifer said. The bank and property manager verified through internal channels. I'll send them to Ms. Ellis and you now. The sequence is clear. Security disabled. Property stolen. Loan secured. Office leased. All within 5 days. I paused, then said quietly, Thank you, Jennifer. Keep everything certified and time-stamped. After hanging up, I sat still. Afternoon light slanted through the window, illuminating the scattered folders. I printed every email, log, and transcript, labeling each file. 1. Security log. 2. Auction evidence. 3. Loan documents. 4. Lease agreement. 5. Trust filing. I placed them neatly into plastic sleeves, sealed them, and stored them inside Ellen's old leather briefcase. Each file now felt like a steel beam in the bridge I was building, a bridge toward justice. Closing the case, I sat upright. Outside, traffic hummed steadily. I knew I had crossed into a new phase. This was no longer a defense. I opened my notebook and wrote the final line of the day. All evidence ready. Time to confront. Thursday afternoon, rain fell softly over Des Moines. I'd just finished a video call with Margaret when I heard a familiar engine outside. Through the window, Mason's silver SUV pulled up to the driveway. Claire sat in the passenger seat, eyes lowered, silent. I slowly turned off the monitor and gathered the folders on my desk. In my mind, I already knew. This visit wasn't about reconciliation. The door swung open. Mason stepped in without knocking, his voice a strained mix of anger and pleading. Dad, we need to talk. I know about the auction, the bank. This is all just a misunderstanding. You're blowing things out of proportion. I nodded calmly and gestured to the chairs. Sit down, both of you. They hesitated, then obeyed. I set my briefcase on the table and opened it. Rainlight from the window shimmered on the plastic cover, labeled Evidence Private Copy. My voice was steady. This is the Safe Home System log. The user who disabled the alarm on February 20th. Mason guessed. This is the police report confirming my back door was opened with an interior key. And this, I placed the printed email on the table. This is the message sent to Alden and Finch Auction House. The sender used the alias Anna Coleman, but the emails registered under Claire's phone number. The air turned heavy. Claire froze, then forced her voice. You were spying on me? I wasn't spying, I replied. I traced the Gmail IP address. It matches your home Wi-Fi. She went silent. Mason jumped in, his tone defensive. I told you. It was a misunderstanding. Claire just asked for a valuation. We weren't going to sell anything. Claire turned to him, voice trembling. I only asked for the price, and you said if someone offered good money, we'd think about it later. I didn't know it would go this far. Mason glared at her. Enough, Claire. I pressed play on the small recorder. Mr. Wang's voice filled the room. The person under the name Anna Coleman contacted us about a silver set, engraved with the letter E, wanting a quick sale. She described it in full detail. I stopped the recording and looked at them. Now tell me, what kind of misunderstanding is that? Claire said nothing. Mason slammed his hand on the table. You don't understand. You've got over $2 million in the bank, land, assets, while we're drowning in debt. You could help us and lose nothing. I kept my voice level. I've helped you your whole life, Mason. Helping doesn't mean letting you steal. Don't confuse the two. His face flushed red. You're treating me like a criminal. I opened another folder, the Midwest Capital Bank loan. A loan for $200,000. Interest, 18.5%. Collateral, Polk County property, my land. You signed this 3 days before the break-in. Do you want me to read the signature line aloud? Mason backed away, muttering, I just meant to borrow temporarily. Once the company got running, I'd pay it back. What company? I asked. Quinn Modular Solutions, LLC. Office Suite 611, IT building downtown. Rent $6,200 a month. Signed 10 days before the break-in. I have the contract right here. No one spoke. Outside, the rain tapped steadily against the porch roof like a ticking clock. Finally, Mason shouted, "You're not thinking straight. That lawyer and her people are turning you against your own family." I met his gaze, unwavering. "Go ahead. I'll submit all evidence to the court. System logs, loan papers, lease, and recordings. Let's see who's truly incompetent." Claire's eyes filled with tears. "Harvey, please don't take this to court. The neighbors, our friends, they'll find out everything." "Claire," I said quietly, "they already know." At that moment, a voice called from outside. "Mr. Quinn, everything all right?" It was Neil Peterson, my groundskeeper, standing under the eaves with Mrs. Marion Ford from across the street, both holding their phones. I stepped onto the porch. Rain misted through the air as Neil asked, "Mr. Quinn, do you need us to call the police?" My voice was firm but calm. "Everything's fine, Neil. They were just leaving. But please, keep that footage. I'll need it." Mason followed me out, face flushed with rage. "You'll regret humiliating me in front of everyone." I stopped at the top step, replying evenly, "No one humiliated you. You did that yourself when you betrayed your own family." Claire tugged his arm, but he shook her off, glaring at me. "This is your fault, Dad. You chose money over your son." I spoke slowly, each word deliberate. "No, I chose truth over deceit." Neil quietly raised his phone, camera aimed their way. I didn't stop him. This scene needed to be documented, not out of revenge, but for clarity. After a tense silence, Mason turned, pulling Claire toward the SUV. The engine roared. The tires splashed through puddles, leaving muddy tracks by the gate. Mrs. Ford stepped closer, her voice gentle. "I recorded everything. You should keep this just in case." I nodded. "Thank you, Marion. This time nothing will disappear in silence." I plugged her USB into my computer and saved the file under a new folder. Confrontation evidence, front porch, AVI. Then I wrote a final note in my journal. March 17th. They denied, threatened, then exposed themselves. Justice begins the moment truth is recorded. I closed the notebook and looked out at the rain-specked window. The house was silent, but for the first time, I felt no fear. The truth had witnesses, and this time, it was on record. 2 days after the confrontation, Des Moines lay under a thin morning fog. I was making coffee when my phone buzzed nonstop. 3 messages from Mrs. Marion Ford, each with a link to the Birchwood Neighborhood Community Facebook group. The top post had already gone viral. "Remember the commotion at Mr. Quinn's house last Thursday? Turns out that the man yelling was his son. Heard he stole from his father. The videos got everything." Neil's footage played beneath the post. Mason shouting, me standing on the porch, Claire crying and the neighbors watching. There was no shouting in the clip, just rain and raw truth. Comments poured in. "Unbelievable! His own son?" "I saw the cops there last week, now it makes sense. I've met Mr. Quinn. Good man. Shame on the son." I turned off the screen and sipped my coffee. The truth had started moving on its own. I no longer needed to push it. That afternoon, Margaret Ellis called, her tone sharp. "Harvey, Mason filed a petition in Polk County Court seeking to declare you mentally incompetent and appoint a temporary guardian." I exhaled slowly. "The final move of a desperate man. What's his claim?" "They allege you're under undue influence from external parties, and that your recent financial changes reflect diminished mental stability." Margaret's voice was firm. "I've responded, requesting an independent psychological evaluation. You'll need to undergo one immediately." "Do you have someone you trust?" I asked. "Yes, Dr. Patricia Westmore, clinical psychologist, former Boston University faculty, now consulting on civil and probate cases. She agreed to conduct a full evaluation, independent and transparent. I need your consent so we can submit the results before the first hearing. Do it, I said. I've got every record, medical and financial, nothing to hide. 3 days later, I met Dr. Wesmore at her Grand Avenue office, a bright room lined with books and certificates. She greeted me with a steady handshake and a clear, intelligent tone. Mr. Quinn, this evaluation isn't just about memory. It's about judgment, planning, and behavioral control. I'll ask detailed questions, and all responses will be recorded. Ask away, I replied. The session lasted nearly 3 hours. She asked about my engineering career, recent financial decisions, and even the numerical breakdown of the trust. I answered calmly, precisely, like explaining a construction report. Near the end, she asked, "If your son walked in now and said he wanted to make amends, would you accept?" I looked toward the window where afternoon light filtered through the blinds. I could forgive him, I said, but not forget. A bridge, once broken, even when repaired, never bears the same load. She nodded quietly, jotting notes. 2 weeks later, on Monday morning, Margaret called. I heard papers rustling on her end. "Harvey, the results are in." "Read them," I said. She spoke each word clearly. Subject demonstrates no cognitive decline or signs of impaired reasoning. Memory intact. Orientation full. Judgment excellent for the age group. Relief spread through me like warmth, though my voice stayed steady. "How long is the report?" 100 pages with appendices, psychological tests, cognitive assessments, financial reasoning, executive function evaluations, signed and certified. Dr. Patricia Wesmore, Ph.D., Boston Medical Center affiliated. Has the court received it? Not yet. I'll file the original tomorrow. Once it's in, Mason will have no case left. But be ready. He'll go public next. This time, though, we have witnesses, documents, and proof. I smiled faintly. Good. Let them see what they doubted, that I'm clearer than ever. Margaret chuckled softly, half admiring, half encouraging. Harvey, you've already won half the battle. I hung up and sat in silence. Afternoon light fell across my desk, illuminating the report Margaret had just emailed. On the first page, bold letters read, Comprehensive Psychological Evaluation, Dr. Patricia Wesmore, Ph.D. I rested my hand on it, feeling the weight of vindication, not just a medical report, but a certificate of reason and dignity from a father once accused by his own son. I wrote in my journal, March 29th, rumors spread, so do lies, but truth has evidence, and I have time. Outside, the wind swept dry leaves along the drive. Online chatter continued, but I knew that when the court opened, the noise would die, not because I shouted louder, but because I had ink and paper on my side. Cliffhanger. That evening, a text from Margaret appeared. Court confirms. Hearing set for 9 a.m., April 4th. They don't know the results yet. Judgment. Excellent. On the morning of April 4th, the sky over Des Moines was unusually clear. I arrived at the Polk County Courthouse at 8:30, half an hour before the hearing. Outside, a few reporters waited with cameras and microphones. I overheard one say, "That's the Quinn case, the son suing the father for incompetence, something about over $2 million in assets." A private family matter had become a public spectacle. Margaret Ellis met me in the second-floor hallway, holding a thick folder. She wore a gray suit, crisp and sharp, her expression calm but steely. "Harvey," she said, "I've already filed Dr. Wesmore's original report with the court. The press showed up because they smell drama. Don't worry. Sit still and let me handle the rest." Across the corridor, Mason was whispering with his attorney, a man barely in his 30s, clearly inexperienced. Claire wasn't there. Perhaps she knew there was no saving this. Mason avoided my gaze, though he tried to look confident. At 9 sharp, the courtroom doors opened. Judge Margaret Harrison, known throughout Polk County for her probate and estate rulings, entered with composed authority. The hearing began. Mason's lawyer spoke first, forcing steadiness into his tone. Your Honor, my client, Mr. Mason Quinn, believes his father, Mr. Harvey Quinn, has recently shown signs of psychological manipulation and instability. He has made several irregular financial transfers, totaling over $2 million into a private trust, without family oversight, the judge interrupted. Do you have any medical evidence of cognitive decline or incapacity? The young lawyer hesitated. We request that the court appoint an independent examiner. Margaret rose smoothly, voice precise. Your Honor, that evaluation has already been conducted. Here is a 100-page report by Dr. Patricia Wesmore of Boston University, a board-certified clinical psychologist, entirely independent. The report clearly concludes no cognitive impairment, reasoning and financial judgment rated excellent for the age group. She handed the notarized copy across the bench. Judge Harrison flipped through several pages, then looked directly at Mason. Mr. Mason Quinn, aside from disagreement over your father's financial decisions, what basis did you have for filing this petition? Mason faltered. I just wanted to make sure his decisions were for everyone's benefit. Whose benefit? The judge asked, her voice even but cold. The room fell silent. Margaret stepped forward once more. Your Honor, my client is fully competent. He was betrayed by those closest to him, and when he took steps to protect himself, he was slandered. For a son to petition to strip his father's rights under these circumstances is not only baseless, but insulting. Judge Harrison set the report down and tapped the gavel, lightly. The petition is denied. There is no legal or medical foundation for declaring Mr. Harvey Quinn incapacitated. This court is adjourned. It was over in 45 minutes. In the hallway, a reporter from the Des Moines Register switched on a recorder. Ms. Ellis, can you confirm this was the first case in Polk County where a son sought to declare his father incompetent over a trust dispute? Margaret replied curtly, confirmed, and also confirmed that it was dismissed. The next morning, the Register ran it on the front page. Son sues father to strip rights. Case dismissed in 45 minutes. Subheading: Polk County Judge, no signs of incapacity. Judgment, excellent. The photo showed Mason leaving the courthouse, head down, while I shook Margaret's hand behind him. Online, the community buzzed. The Birchwood neighborhood Facebook group filled with comments. So the old man's sharper than all of us combined. The son should be ashamed. That family's famous now, just not in the way they wanted. The next day, I stopped by the cafe near the park. Mark, the owner, smiled as he handed me a cup. You're in the paper, Mr. Quinn. People say you handled it like a pro. I told them, of course he's an engineer. He plans everything. I smiled faintly. Thanks. I just did what needed to be done. On the drive home, I saw Mason leaning against his old silver SUV at the end of the street, his face hollow, his eyes emptied of anger. I didn't stop. Our conversation had ended on the porch days ago. That evening, with the wind rising outside, I reorganized my study. 3 thick folders lay ready on the desk, labeled in black ink. 1. Financial fraud, loan and lease evidence. 2. Theft of property, auction correspondence. 3. Security system, log, entry record. I sealed them carefully, then carried them next door. Detective Laura Nash, my neighbor and retired investigator, was pouring tea. You came at the right time, she said. I heard Mason lost the case. I'm not here to discuss that. I placed the folders on her table. These contain every document. Bank records, contracts, email verifications. I want this turned over for criminal review. Laura studied me, then nodded. I'll submit it directly to the city's investigation unit. If your evidence checks out, they'll open a theft and fraud case immediately. I nodded back. Thank you, Laura. I just want justice to move. Steady, not rushed. She stacked the folders neatly. Don't worry. The ball's in our court now. I walked home through the quiet night. Streetlights shimmered on the wet pavement after the rain. From the moment Laura signed the receipt, I knew the story had entered a new chapter. No longer about family, but about the law. Journal note. April 4th. Petition dismissed. Headline published. Dignity restored. Next step. Criminal justice. The following week, Des Moines felt swept by an unfamiliar wind. On the evening of April 6th, Detective Laura Nash knocked on my door, holding a thick folder sealed inside a plastic evidence bag. "The city's investigation unit has reviewed everything," she said. "They've officially opened a theft over $30,000 case under the Iowa Criminal Code and are expanding it toward fraud and property conversion." She laid the preliminary indictment papers on my desk, each page stamped with red seals. "This is being transferred to the Des Moines Police Department's Financial Crimes Division. I've been assigned as liaison, your direct contact with the investigators." I nodded. "Thank you, Laura. I know to stay quiet and only provide documentation when requested." "Exactly," she replied. "From here on, justice does the work." 3 days later, the chain reaction began. First came Midwest Capital Bank. An email hit my inbox, a copy of the risk notice they'd sent Mason. It read, "Loan review triggered. Borrower under criminal investigation. Loan NAR MC 7421. Subject to immediate reassessment under Section 6.4. High-risk borrower." I paused at the final line and allowed myself a faint smile. Full repayment may be required within 30 days. Inside the bank's system, their automated risk review algorithm had already triggered a loan recall. I didn't need to interfere. I just watched. 30 days to repay $200,000. Something Mason could never manage. 2 days later came the landlord of the IT building downtown. My phone rang. It was Thomas Brennan, the property manager and an old collaborator from past projects. "Harvey," he said, "I thought you should know, Mason Quinn, the tenant on the 6th floor, was just listed as a felony risk tenant. His lease includes a clause for early termination if he's under criminal investigation. I've issued a 30-day vacate notice." "Understood," I replied simply. "Just follow the procedure." By Friday afternoon, news had spread across downtown. Former colleagues and real estate partners began calling, some out of curiosity, others from concern. One of my old engineering peers said, "Harvey, we heard about Mason. We won't get involved, but you did the right thing." Another texted, "Paper's about to run in the legal section. Stay strong." Back on Birchwood Drive, public opinion split. Neighbors on the east side, the ones who'd witnessed Mason shouting on my porch, stood firmly by me. They said it openly in the cafe and supermarket aisles. "Poor Mr. Quinn, what kind of son does that?" But others kept their distance, wary of scandal. An elderly woman at the end of the street turned away as I greeted her and whispered to a friend, "Right or wrong, once the law's involved, it's never good." I understood. People fear scandal more than truth. One afternoon, I walked past Mason's former office downtown. The glass door bore a notice. "Premises to be vacated by May 5th, under lease, Clause 8.2, felony risk violation." The office was empty, only a desk and a few peeling startup posters left behind. His grand company, Quinn Modular Solutions, LLC, once promised to take the family to the next level. Now it was nothing more than a name on paper. Yet the final blow didn't come from the court or the bank. It came from Claire. In early May, Margaret forwarded a string of social media posts and messages that had begun spreading fast. The first line read, "Don't believe everything the papers say. Some fathers, driven by greed and manipulation, push their sons out of their lives just to keep control of the money. I know, because I'm his daughter-in-law." The account was C. Quinn, personal blog, with a blurry profile picture, but everyone recognized it. The post distorted everything, claiming I was jealous of my son's success, that I had been influenced by outsiders, and that I had destroyed my family's reputation just to hold on to power. Margaret called me that night. "Don't react, Harvey," she said firmly. "This is just a rumor campaign. Responding only fuels it. The press already has the court records. The truth is on your side. I ended the call and stared out the window. The street outside glowed softly under porch lights, calm as if nothing had ever happened. But somewhere out there, Claire was typing, trying to salvage what was left of their name. I didn't feel anger, only regret, because they still hadn't learned justice doesn't need belief, only existence. I opened my journal and wrote a single line. May 8th, case opened. The system reacts. Those who mock the law now find it knocking at their door. Their true loss isn't money, it's reputation. I closed the notebook and turned off the desk lamp. In the darkness, the streetlight slipped through the curtains, glinting off the sealed evidence folders waiting for their day in court. The game of dignity had entered a new phase, and this time, the law was on my side. The next morning, my inbox held a police update. Midwest Capital Loan under investigation. Possible fraud with forged collateral. I read the line and knew for certain Mason was losing everything, and the chain reaction was still far from over. 2 months had passed since the police opened the case, and summer arrived in Des Moines with heavy, humid rain. The oak tree in front of my house spread its branches wide, new leaves shading the walkway, but inside me, a colder order was settling into place. One morning in early July, Margaret called, her tone composed. "Harvey," she said, "I just received notice from the Douglas County Family Court. Claire Quinn has filed for divorce in Omaha, Nebraska. She left Des Moines a week ago." I was silent for a moment before replying, "So she chose to run." "Exactly. In her filing, she cited irreconcilable differences, but I think she just wants to escape the backlash. Her blog posts are gone, and the neighborhood already knows the truth." I said quietly, "The truth doesn't need to be deleted. It stands on its own." A week later, Mason received a summons from the Des Moines Criminal Court. I didn't attend that day, but Margaret went to observe. The hearing lasted 15 minutes. The prosecutor read a preliminary indictment for theft, fraud, and property conversion, and allowed the victim's family to submit a resolution offer, a proposed settlement if the defendant admitted wrongdoing. That evening, Margaret came to my house carrying a slim envelope. "Harvey," she said, "this is your offer draft. I've titled it Confession and Waiver Agreement." I read each line carefully. The document was short, only 2 pages. I, Mason Quinn, acknowledge that I used property belonging to my father, Mr. Harvey Quinn, without his consent. I agreed to repay all damages and waive any claims in exchange for the withdrawal of criminal proceedings. I signed my name at the bottom, under proposing party, and handed it back. "Send it to Mason's attorney. Give them 1 week to respond." Margaret nodded. "I'll deliver it first thing tomorrow." 1 week later, Mason showed up at my gate. The air was thick with heat and the smell of wet soil. He wore a wrinkled shirt, hair slick with sweat, holding an envelope. "Dad, can we talk for a minute?" I stood on the porch and didn't invite him in. "Say it here." He opened the envelope, skimmed the confession and waiver, then looked at me with fury. "You think I'll sign this? I'm not guilty. The whole city's talking about me, and you're just watching." I stayed calm. "If you weren't guilty, you wouldn't have been summoned. I'm not forcing you. I'm giving you one last chance to keep some dignity, so your children can someday say their father stopped before it was too late." Mason's voice rose. "You want me to kneel?" "No," I said slowly. "I want you to take responsibility." He stared at me for a few seconds, then tore the paper in half, the fragments scattering in the wind. "Keep your justice, Dad. I'll defend myself." His shouting echoed through the yard. Across the street, Neil Peterson was mowing his lawn, and Mrs. Marion Ford stood on her porch. They both saw everything. Neil instinctively pulled out his phone, the same man who had filmed before. I didn't move. The wind caught the torn paper, one piece sticking to the fence. Mason's eyes burned red. "You've ruined my life," I answered softly. "No, you ruined it when you chose lies over truth." He turned away, stormed to his car, and the roar of the engine faded down the wet road. That night, a second video appeared in the Birchwood Neighborhood Community Group. Less than a minute long, Mason shouting, ripping the paper, me standing still on the porch, and Neil recording from across the street. No captions, no commentary. The image spoke for itself. Within 12 hours, it spread through nearby community groups. A small local paper, the Des Moines Ledgers, ran a short feature. "Man who sued father for incompetence caught on video tearing plea agreement." The comments came fast. If he did nothing wrong, why all the screaming? The father's calm is impressive. From businessman to cautionary tale, Mason Quinn. I didn't read much of it. Margaret called later that night. "We don't have to push this case anymore, Harvey. Public opinion is doing the work." I sat in my study, gazing at the old oak outside as its leaves rustled gently in the wind. I remembered Mason's face that afternoon. Not angry, just lost, hollowed out by pride and fear. The confident son I once knew was gone, replaced by a man collapsing under his own ambition. I opened my notebook and wrote, "July 17th, Claire left. Mason tore his last chance. The city has seen it all, but I feel no triumph. Only one truth remains clear, no matter how painful. Truth is the only mirror that shows who we truly are." Outside, rain began to fall softly, tapping against the eaves in rhythm with the rustle of leaves. I closed the notebook and turned off the lamp. The story between me and Mason wasn't over, but it was no longer. Between father and son, it was now between a man who kept his word and a man who broke it. The next morning, I received an email from Laura Nash titled, "Case Update, Prosecutor, Review Approved." Beneath it, a single line. "District Attorney moving forward with formal charges. You don't need to act. The law has taken over." The early September morning in Des Moines felt cooler than usual. I stepped once again into the Polk County Courthouse, but this time there was no tension in my chest, just the calm weight of closure. The halls still carried that familiar mix of paper and coffee, but the air was quieter, as if everyone already knew what was about to unfold. The courtroom was smaller than before. On the right sat Mason beside his court-appointed attorney, his face hollow, unshaven. There was no sign of Claire. She had left the state 2 months earlier, as confirmed by the divorce filing I'd received via email. At the prosecution table was Assistant District Attorney Mark Thompson, someone Margaret had worked with in several estate fraud cases. Judge Harrison entered, her voice as clear and deliberate as I remembered. "We have case number 24, CR 712, Mason Quinn, charged with theft over $30,000, fraud and property conversion. Mr. Thompson, please proceed." The prosecutor opened the file and read aloud, "Your Honor, after partial recovery of misappropriated assets and the defendant's cooperation in submitting financial records, the state agrees to a plea deal, acknowledging partial culpability and mitigating factors. First offense, partial restitution, and no continuing harm." Judge Harrison nodded. "Does the defendant wish to speak?" Mason stood, voice cracked and low. I want to apologize to my father, Mr. Harvey Quinn. I was wrong. I just wanted to save my project, but I lost control." The judge regarded him evenly. "You understand, an apology doesn't erase guilt, but it can begin a correction. The court accepts the plea agreement." The gavel struck 3 times. "Sentence: 3 years probation, 200 hours of community service, and $50,000 restitution. Plea deal accepted following partial recovery of assets and confirmation of first offense." The sound of the gavel was firm and final. No one spoke. I simply nodded, like an engineer verifying that the bridge had been built exactly to plan. Judge Harrison looked at Mason one last time. "Mr. Quinn, understand this. Your father did not win or lose today. The law merely did its job." Mason said nothing, eyes downcast. As the bailiff guided him toward the door, I caught one last look. His eyes were exhausted, hollow, stripped of arrogance and defiance. That afternoon, the Des Moines Business Record ran the headline, "Former Entrepreneur Mason Quinn, sentenced to 3 years probation for property fraud." The accompanying photo showed Mason leaving the courthouse, head lowered, while Margaret stood behind me holding a folder. Messages poured in, former colleagues, old neighbors, acquaintances. "You did the right thing, Harvey. Not many could stay that calm. You won, but you didn't lose yourself." I didn't reply. I just read them, then closed my phone. Inside, I felt no triumph, only peace. That evening, Margaret and I sat in our usual cafe on Grand Avenue. The smell of dark roast filled the air, warm light glinting off the wooden table. She looked at me and asked, "So what now, Harvey? It's over, isn't it?" I shook my head slightly. "Not yet. For me, it ends only when what was taken can be used for something good." She raised an eyebrow. "Meaning?" I reached into my leather case and unfolded a handwritten note. "I want to start a foundation, Margaret. In my wife's name, the Ellen Quinn Foundation. I'll transfer part of the trust assets into it to fund scholarships for engineering students and support displaced construction workers. I have more than enough." She smiled softly, genuinely. "That's the best ending I've ever heard," I said quietly. "I don't want my life to stop at revenge. I want the rest of it to be repaired." Outside, the autumn breeze carried the faint scent of coming rain. I looked out the window, the streetlights reflecting across the tabletop. In that moment, I understood. Peace doesn't come from a courtroom. It comes from turning justice into kindness. Margaret rested her hand on the folder, smiling. "I'll prepare the paperwork. What should the foundation's motto be?" I answered, "Ellen Quinn Foundation, for those who build." 3 months after the trial, autumn returned to Des Moines. The wind carried the scent of oak leaves and steel dust from half-finished construction sites. In my study, I signed the final set of documents from Margaret, the certification of the Ellen Quinn Foundation for those who build. The foundation was registered with an initial capital of $750,000, drawn from the dividends I had withdrawn from the trust. Its single purpose, to award scholarships to students in engineering and construction who were recognized for professional ethics and honesty in their work. I wanted that to be the true legacy, not money, but values. In November, the first ceremony took place in the auditorium of Iowa State University. The seats were filled with students, professors, and old colleagues. The Des Moines Register was there to cover the story. The headline the next day was simple yet profound. "From family scandal to a legacy of integrity, Harvey Quinn's journey to restored honor." The photo that accompanied it showed me shaking hands with 2 young students as I handed them scholarship envelopes. Behind us hung a banner that read, "Integrity builds bridges." On the same page in the lower corner was a picture of Mason in court, head bowed, captioned, "Sentenced to probation in property fraud case." The contrast needed no explanation. After the ceremony, a young woman approached me, took my hand, and said softly, "Sir, my father is a steel worker too. You're the reason I still believe this trade carries dignity." I smiled, shook her hand, and said nothing more. Maybe that was the only thank you I ever needed. A week later, while tidying the study, I found a small envelope in the mailbox. The handwriting was unmistakable. From Mason. I opened it. "I'm sorry. I know it's too late, but I want you to know I've started overworking at a machine shop in Cedar Rapids. I don't expect forgiveness, only that you stay healthy." I read it once, folded it carefully, and laid it on the desk. The afternoon light streamed through the window, falling across the paper. I smiled faintly, lighter than I had in years, then tore the letter in half. "I don't hate him," I said quietly. "I just don't need it anymore." That evening I drove to the Riverside Bridge, the one I had designed in 1998, my last major project before retirement. The sunset glowed across the steel framework, each weld still bearing my hand's trace. The river wind carried the chill of fall and the familiar scent of metal. I stood there, watching the golden reflection shimmer on the water, feeling a calm unlike any other. Anyone standing nearby might have heard me speaking softly, as if to time itself. Justice isn't always loud. It only asks that you don't forget who you are. I stayed until the sun dipped behind the bridge, then drove home. On the passenger seat rested Ellen's old camera. I thought of the places we had promised to visit, but never did. Yellowstone, the Grand Canyon, the Oregon coast. 2 weeks later, I left. No schedule, no entourage. Just one man driving across the Midwest, stopping wherever there was a bridge, a breeze, and a fading light. I took photos, wrote notes, and sent each picture to the foundation as a quiet reminder. Here is where justice meets peace. When I tell this story, it's not for pity or praise. I only want to say one thing. If you hold on to the truth long enough, it will find its way into the light. And sometimes, justice isn't the echo of a gavel, but the moment you see yourself in the mirror and no longer feel anger. If you've listened this far, if you've ever been betrayed, belittled, or stripped of what was rightfully yours, remember, you don't have to shout to reclaim justice. You only need to stand firm and act with decency, because silence, when placed in the right hands, is the strongest voice there is. And if you still believe integrity matters in this world, share this story, because somewhere out there, someone may need to hear that justice doesn't have to be loud. It only asks that you never lose yourself.